What's going on, everybody? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and I am going to try keep this video as, I won't say short and sweet as possible, but I've been known to ramble, and I kind of want to just try focus in on the one thing here. So a couple of weeks ago, we all know there was all those rumors about the PS5 hardware and the specs and all. I'm going to completely disregard those, because I didn't really want to talk about this whole situation, but I decided that, you know what, in the run up to E3, and just looking back on the Xbox One, the Xbox One S, the Xbox One X, the PS4 and the PS4 Pro, it really feels kind of important to an extent as well. It'll just go in on top, and you can almost consider it my take of the PS5 specs or whatever. So this also goes for Microsoft as well as Sony. It's not just the PS5 but the Xbox 2 or whatever it is. So the main thing I want to talk about is what am I expecting hardware wise from the new consoles. Whenever they come out, I don't know. There's people saying they could come out as early as 2019 or as early as late 2019. They could come out in 2020, I don't know. But let's just quickly assume that they're not going to come out next year, that they'll probably come out around late 2020. So what do I think is going to happen? Well, first off, the PS4, Xbox One, PS4 Pro, Xbox One S and Xbox One X all use AMD based hardware. AMD based hardware that is all x86 architecture. In the past, it's kind of been hinted that going forward everything is going to remain the same, so that everything is kind of forwards compatible or backwards compatible, whatever way you want to look at it, and it just makes coding and developing and features, it just makes it all easier. If they use the whole unified architecture going forward and it's basically upgrades of the same thing, it just makes everything easier. And there's no, like, when you look back at the Xbox 360 and the PS3, you had to develop these games differently, which is why some of them ran good on one console and ran very poorly on the other. Look at Bayonetta on the 360 versus Bayonetta on the PS3. Look at Mass Effect 2 on the 360 and then look at Mass Effect 2 on the PS3. That was also worked in the opposite as well, in reverse. Some games were primarily developed on the PS3 and ran and looked better on there than they did on the 360. Those games of course were few and far between, some of which range from, say, LA Noire looks and runs better on the PS3 than it does on the 360, and Final Fantasy 13, again something that runs and looks better on the PS3 but also kind of it runs marginally worse, but a kind of considerable lower resolution, actually, now that I think about it, on the 360. You get the point here anyway. These were very different consoles with very different architectures and very different hardware. Not so much the case with the PS4 and the Xbox One. Now, what do I think we're going to see going forward? Well, with all the advances that have moved on in time in both CPU and GPU in the hardware scale, we'll call it, or hardware spectrum, over the last maybe 6 years or so. I say 6 years because yes, even though the consoles did release at the end of 2013, the hardware they use is actually from 2012, so that just goes to show how out of date that was from that point of view. Now yes, of course I realize, I know that console hardware is never cutting edge, it's never bleeding edge, it's never top of the line, because they just can't afford it. If you put top of the line bleeding edge hardware into a console, it's going to be €800 sold at a massive loss. It's going to be 1,200, 1,500 euro just to maintain either like cutting 1% profit. But again, that's not up for debate here, that's a whole other story. But the big issue with these current consoles is, first off, they were crippled out of the gate. The GPU in them wasn't even great, it wasn't anything super outdated, but the CPU was actually extremely outdated, underpowered, and frankly completely hamstrung both consoles from day one. And that also applies to the Xbox One S, the Xbox One X, and the PS4 Pro. All of these consoles, well, let's cut the S out of it for the moment. We'll just look at the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. Both of these consoles are completely destroyed by their CPU. They're absolutely limited in every single way by this extremely ridiculous, laughable CPU. Yes, of course, there are a couple of studios out there who have done wonders with this CPU, but it doesn't change the fact that it is completely destroying what these consoles can do. So when it comes to the future of the consoles and what we'll see next with the Xbox 2 and the PS5, realistically, what I think we're going to see is something similar to the Xbox One X when it comes to the GPU side of it. The GPU in the Xbox One X is considerably more powerful than what's in the PS4 Pro. And it's more akin to what's the name of that shitty GPU? And it's more akin to an AMD RX 580. Not a great GPU in its own right, but when you look at putting it into a console and the money and performance side of it, it makes a bit more sense. However, the 580 is laughable on PC, but it has a market elsewhere. And that's still a decent GPU to put into a console, especially one where price is a big concern. So that's why I think we're going to see something like whatever's in the Xbox One X as the GPU for both of these consoles. There might be one or two very small minor customizations here or there, but overall I think that's going to be the same kind of thing. Now what I do think is going to be a massive improvement is the CPU. We're going to go from the absolutely terrible, laughable, laudable thing was a joke even when it was first launched, let alone put into these consoles. We're going to be moving away from that Jaguar piece of shit, and I reckon that they're going to put in either a first or second gen AMD Ryzen CPU. Now someone's going to go crazy and just automatically say, no, it's too expensive, that's too cutting edge, blah blah blah. Not really. When you look at the second generation Ryzen CPUs, the lower end stuff in their actual series is still pretty cost effective and is, first off, leagues and no comparison whatsoever, miles ahead of what they offered before with the old AMD stuff. But what they're able to do and the cost they can do it for, at least, and even at retail at that. Imagine what they can do when they're cutting like OEM cost deals with Microsoft and Sony. I think that's what we're going to be seeing in there. I think we're going to be seeing a very low-end Ryzen 2 chip in there to go with that GPU. And that will probably give an absolute massive bonus. The best way I can describe what we'll probably see, the visual fidelity and the level of everything we're going to see, providing they don't completely gimp everything with 4K, because that just completely destroys all what they can do with the graphics. But you're going to be seeing the kind of games we have now just turn up to max settings. What do I mean by that? Well, when you look at a game out at the moment on PS4 and Xbox One, they're usually running somewhere around the medium setting range. So they look a lot closer to what they will on the current PC's max settings. Of course, at that point, the PC's max settings will have moved beyond it, but what I'm saying is you can kind of expect what we see as PC gamers now at high-end stuff, which will eventually become medium settings by the time your PlayStation 5 and Xbox One come out. So that will actually be a fairly decent improvement over what they have now on the consoles. And of course, one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing that you will see, is because the CPU is no longer retarded, you will see a considerably higher amount of games running in 60 frames per second, or at least between 30 and 60 frames, not just completely capped at 30 or running below it. And I will say one last thing right before we end out the video, but you know how all these companies will say 60 frames per second doesn't matter when they conveniently can't even keep 30 frames per second, let alone hit 60? I guarantee you that when these next consoles come out, if they do use something similar to what I've listed in this video, and they can reliably and consistently hit 60 or near 60 frames per second, they will be touting 60 frames per second as the best thing since sliced fucking bread. And they'll be saying it matters left, right and center. It's always mattered. It's always mattered since the Nintendo. It's always mattered since the Super Nintendo. And anyone who says otherwise is completely wrong. Any live action-based game that doesn't have 60 frames per second is doing it wrong. Mark those words, people. When you see all the marketing and all for the new consoles, mark these words. Remember what I just said. Anyway, I've gone on for about twice as long as I originally wanted to talk about, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Let me know in the comments section below what you're expecting hardware-wise from the new consoles, be it the PS5, be it the Xbox 2, or whatever it is. Do you think we're going to get something similar to the RX 580, which is basically what's in the Xbox One X now? It's just completely hamstrung by the terrible CPU. Do you think we'll get a revised version of whatever comes next, like a modified 680? Because Lord knows those fucking Vega chips are terrible. So let me know all of that good stuff in the comments section below. Feel free to hit the like button because there's no way I didn't do a good job on this video. While you're at it, maybe even press that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Granted, YouTube probably still won't send you all the notifications for the videos and the live streams and whatnot, but hey, at least you can say you tried, right? Anyway, as always, thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the rest of the videos in my channel.